throw it long. Doesn't look like they're going to. They do not. I'm surprised at that. Berg with the heat. It goes! Carly Berg from beyond midcourt to beat the buzzer.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenour and Sean Meyers.
Welcome into another episode of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood Podcast here on the Westmoreland Sports Network's YouTube channel. I'm Sean Meyers, joined by Jack Ridenour. We've got a lot to get to on this episode. Of course, we'll have our plays of the week, 3 different plays featured. We also have our team of the week, the Greensburg Central Catholic Centurions boys basketball team, who are off to an undefeated start. They have been outstanding so far this year. And a look ahead at several games that will take place over the holidays, with several holiday tournaments on the horizon. But Jack, we'll begin with our starting 5 takeaways, the biggest stories from this past week across Westmoreland County basketball. And we begin on the boys' side with Derry area. They got a couple of big wins against Westmoreland County opponents. Greensburg Salem first, and then an OT thriller against, albeit shorthanded, Bell Vernon area team. The second game this week for the Trojans. Really, when it comes back to looking at early season victories, maybe dictating who gets in, who gets out, and playoff seeding, those two could certainly loom large. The one in particular against the Leopards really stands out as a key victory for Coach Espo's team.
And you mentioned it, Bell Vernon was without a lot of guys. They were without Zion Moore, one of the top scorers in the area. But I've been really impressed with how Derry has been able to overcome some of the losses that they had in the offseason. You graduate a guy like Nate Papuga, who last year scored at an incredible rate. But the sophomore Stanley Rajkovic, what a season he's having. 26 against Bell Vernon. He's been playing great basketball. I was impressed with him last year. And then John Wozniak's also been a nice emergence through the roster with some of the guys graduating for the Trojans. So I think that this Derry area team, they can make a lot of noise. They've got a little bit of a tough road ahead of them. West Mifflin, York, and then they run into Deer Lakes, a non-section game for them. But defense has been the calling card for them. I mean, that's been really what they've been doing. 49 points per game. That's, the fewest allowed in the section. And the next is East Allegheny, who's averaging 53 allowed. However, they're 2-5. They're scoring under 45 points a game. So really, out of the teams that are above 500, I mean, they're playing some of the best defense in that section.
Yeah, and you talked about Big Stanley. He was really good as a freshman, right? And he was part of a team that made it to the state tournament for the first time in program history. Some players, and you hope that it doesn't happen, but some players, they can kind of be like, all right, I'm already pretty good player. I don't need to work harder than everyone else. But I know Coach Esposito said that throughout the offseason, he really honed his offensive game and improved it. So as good as he was as a freshman, they expected him to be even better this year. So far, he has delivered. The biggest difference is he's probably the guy that teams try to shut down now, which wasn't the case last year, because you mentioned Nate Papuga was probably number 1 on the opposing scouting report. So the fact that he has elevated his play while getting more pressure from the opposition is pretty significant. And I know guys like John Wozniak and Isaac Leonard have stepped up in a big way too. It's really going to be interesting to see, once we get deep into the season, can the Trojans ultimately have the same success in postseason play that they did last year that felt like such a breakthrough for this program?
And for Stanley, I mean, I think his big thing is going to be, how can he start to adapt to defenses, like you said, honing in on him? He's going to have to start learning to play with a double team sometimes. I'm sure he's already dealing with it right now. So other guys have to be prepared and have to be willing to step up. Rajkovic is going to obviously be the driving force, but who can step up around him and be that extra force? I know Wozniak's been able to show that, but can they get a third? Can they get a fourth, a fifth option? They were a pretty deep team in some regards last year, but you lose Papuga, Brady Angus graduates, so you do have some pieces to kind of to fit in there, but I think that they're going to be pretty good the rest of the way.
And I think Bell Vernon's going to be okay as well. Obviously, they need to get those guys back. Zion Moore already has a 40-point outburst this season. So they get him back. They look like a completely different team. I'm sure they are thinking about maybe writing a different outcome when these teams meet the second time around. But the big story, the Trojans are now 3-0 in Class 4A Section 3. That's a great start for them. 3-0 also applies to the Franklin Regional girls team. And Jack, I know you had a chance to see them earlier this season in a victory, pretty lopsided against Penn Hills. it's a program that, seemingly has taken a step forward, and Bernie Puchka deserves a lot of credit. They also had a lot of experience returning this year. So far, it seems like it's paid dividends. 3-0 has already positioned them in a really good spot to try to make some noise.
I'm always fascinated by teams that finish out seasons really strong and then carry that momentum with them into the next year. That's exactly what Franklin Regional girls have done. I mean, last year, if people remember, they struggled for a majority of the year. Towards the end of the season, they come to life. If I'm not mistaken, they were the only team, I think, that had 6 wins in their classification to not make the playoffs. So they truly made a legitimate chance and a legitimate run at getting into the postseason, and they've carried that momentum with them into this year. Madison DeRiggi is another year with more experience under her belt at the point guard position. You obviously have a lot of experience returning Torrin Fulton down low, who's been a mainstay on the varsity level for Franklin Regional. So this Franklin Regional girls team is definitely in a good place. They've had some big lopsided wins, and I think in a way that's a good thing, but in another way, the question is, have they been tested enough? I think they've got a big test on January 2nd against Fox Chapel, but you beat Plum 54-37, you take down Penn Hills 60-32. That was truly a dominating win from start to finish, and then throttle Gateway 58-21. You start to wonder, okay, when somebody comes in and is scoring 40 points, 45 points, how do they respond? So I think that they've been able to win the games that, quote unquote, they should, but now it's a matter of, can they win games that on paper maybe people are doubting them? Maybe they're the underdogs. Defense is going to be key for this team. I think that if they can play really good defense throughout the rest of the season, I think that they're going to be in a really good spot.
And remember, they're in a section with Armstrong as well, which people would say, well, that's a team that played for a championship and almost won a championship. But the Riverhawks are up to a rough start. So you already have wins over Plum, Penn Hills, Gateway. Armstrong looks to be down. As long as you take care of business in those games, worst case scenario, Jack, you're probably in the top 3 in your section. So it does feel like a year where they're going to have a real opportunity to break through and get into the postseason. Well, a team that wants to get back to the postseason for the first time in a few years is Greater Latrobe boys. And they certainly established themselves as a terrific team to start the year, but they ran into a stiff test this past Tuesday. They suffered their first loss overall in the campaign. It came at the expense of the Uniontown Red Raiders. We expected a game that maybe could get into the 90s, didn't quite reach that. But, Greater Latrobe, I think, will be able to bounce back, Jack. That said, they kind of dealt with something that maybe going into the game they weren't anticipating. Red Raiders went zone defense at a certain point, and Greater Latrobe's offense that was prolific early kind of dried up. So it'll be an opportunity for them, over the Christmas break, and they're going to go visit the site of Hoosiers out in Indiana to try to work on some things and maybe see how far they still have to go, despite the fact that they got up to a terrific start.
There's 2 things from this. One, I think that Uniontown is a legitimate contender. I mean, they look really good. If I'm not mistaken, they have 3 1,000 career point scorers on their team. I mean,
they got some Notorious Grooms. He's a name that we've heard for quite a while. And actually, in that game against Greater Latrobe, Calvin Winfrey got 1,000 points. So that's a pretty cool milestone. Yeah, they're really good. There's no doubt about that. They're going to be a team that's going to be in the title conversation all season.
And when you've got a team that's got, I mean, let's face it, that's some teams don't even have a player that maybe is getting close to 750. You got 2-3 guys that are over 1,000. That's pretty hard. But you bring up the point about the zone, and it was interesting because it was a 3-2 zone. I feel like you don't see that anymore. You see 2-3 zone. I've seen a lot of 1-3-1 for some reason, and some teams are having a hard time with that. But a 3-2 zone, the interesting thing of that, it basically is saying, hey, we're not letting you get the ball in the high post. We're going to make you beat us from beyond the arc. We want you to shoot that ball if you have to, but you're not getting inside the perimeter. You are not going to get inside the perimeter. And that's a Latrobe team. They like to do that. They like to get inside. They like to drive. They like to get in the paint. They like those paint touches. That's exactly what Coach Brad Wetzel wants. And I just think that, when you allow 29 points in an 8-minute quarter, you're not going to win. It's impossible to win in that type of situation. And I think they were definitely caught off guard with the zone. But a 3-2 zone, like I said, I mean, that is a really, St. Vincent does a great job. They play a 2-3 zone, but they play almost like almost a raised 2-3 zone. And what I mean by that is the guy that is on the bottom near the block, he will come up and almost shade towards the wing a little bit until that guy at the elbow bumps him back down and says, okay, I got this. Now get back down. So it's this weird, amoebic 2-3-3-2 zone that teams just cannot figure out. So if
you have a chalkboard behind you could start using at this point?
No, we need a telestration. But that's, we'll get to headquarters about that one. But bottom line is that, like you said, Latrobe's fine. And I think Uniontown is very good, but the only way you learn anything in a season is when you lose. And I think Latrobe's going to definitely lose, or definitely learn a lot from this loss. Not to mention, I don't know if you saw this, Uniontown, they had a 2 a.m. flight the next morning to Florida.
Yeah, I would imagine that's got to be tough, right? I mean, you go on a road game, and it's basically like you're making a darn trip out of the country at that point. So yeah, I would imagine that would be tough for them to actually focus on the game against Greater Latrobe, because beforehand you're focusing on, I don't want to forget this for our flight out of here. By the way, I should note, so John Wetzel had a really good game, but Max Butler had kind of a down game by his standards. And then Andy Tash picked up some foul trouble early that kind of took him out of a rhythm. So a couple guys that probably typically will be better didn't have their best efforts against the Red Raiders. So that's something that I think, maybe second time around, or certainly once we get back into section play in January, the Wildcats will be able to kind of navigate those waters a little bit better. Well, a team that had an opportunity for a statement win and maybe a chance at a little bit of redemption were the Borough Buccaneers boys team. But Jack, they lost their title rematch against Deer Lakes, and they also lost against Knock earlier in the week. Borough graduated a lot. I think they still have high expectations, but they've already run into a couple of heavyweights, and so far they've not been able to pass the test.
And I think a big loss for them was Mackie Bennis. I mean, he was really kind of the engine that made them go last year, to that title run against Deer Lakes. Not to mention, that's a very emotional season. That's a very strenuous season for teams to have to go through. There's a lot of highs, there's a lot of lows, and then you get to that point, the last remaining double-digit seed, and you lose to Deer Lakes. It was a very close game. I know that we were broadcasting it, and Roger Downs and I were on the call for it. It was very, very close. It can be hard the next year for a team that, again, I'm sure coming into last year, they obviously had hopes to get to the championship, but I think at some point they probably said, okay, we have to actually put it into place. And then it happens. And then you have to come back the next year and you have to go back to that same level of expectation. It's hard. It's very hard. I was reading an article in that game against Deer Lakes. The referees were also not giving many calls to Burrell. Obviously, you don't want to blame the referees for things, but that can definitely become a little bit of a distraction. I know Tucker Batar picked up a technical foul in that game. So clearly a game that just, when you get your focus taken out with the refs, everything can go haywire. And I think that's exactly what happened for the Buccaneers.
Well, let's kind of bring it full circle. So they lose to Knock. They lose against Deer Lakes. By the way, the loss was at Deer Lakes. So you hope second time around, a little deeper in the season, you're at home against the Lancers. Maybe you can get that one. But they did have a nice bounce back, because right after they lost to Deer Lakes, the next morning, they make the trek to Hempfield for the WCCA tournament. And who did they beat, Jack? The Red Hot Dairy Area Trojans. So, not all is lost for this team. Obviously, they're still a really good team. They're in a tough section. Maybe they're fighting for third or fourth place when it's all said and done. But I think they just want to get into the playoffs, because we saw last year they can make a little bit of a run. Also, that win against the Trojans, Tucker Batar got 1,000 points in his career. So big ups to him. That's a major accomplishment for a very impressive young man there with the Buccaneers. We'll wrap up our starting five takeaways, not at the high school level, Jack, but let's shift to the collegiate scene and Seton Hill University women's basketball. And we had a chance to see them this past week. Unbelievably, they have lost a game now. They lost to Holy Family on Sunday, but prior to that, they had been perfect. They're moving up the national rankings. They're the top team in the rankings for the Atlantic region. Maeve Gallagher has done some incredible things in her second season. This is a program that anyone that pays attention to college ball in this area should be taking note of. They have a chance to truly do something special in the all-time history of Seton Hill Griffins women's basketball.
Christian Fry, I think, is making a case for player of the year right now. And Maeve Gallagher, I mean, at this point, she might be running away with coach of the year. The job that she has done in her second season, incredible, truly incredible. And I enjoy when she talks with us after games, because she's very open about the style of play that they're playing. She's very much so willing to say, hey, listen, we do give up points. We are going to do that. With the style of basketball that we play, it is bound to happen. And I think that is actually the big difference in why this style of basketball is working for Seton Hill. When you try to play this pace, up-tempo, fast, get the ball out and go, and you want to have this almost feeling of, no, we don't give up points. No, we're going to be good defensively. You can't have one without the other. So something's going to have to be traded off. And I think for Maeve Gallagher...
Sorry, Jack.
No, you're okay. Bless you.
I know this season for the Griffins is nothing to sneeze at, so continue.
No. Oh, of course. But yeah, I just think that with Coach Gallagher being open and admitting that, I think that allows for everybody's shoulders to lower and say, hey, you know what? If Coach knows that we're going to give up points, then we also don't feel pressure that, oh my gosh, we didn't get a stop. Because you want to know why? Because Mia Kalic is going to inbound the basketball. Christiane Fry is going to take the ball right at the free throw line, a burst of speed, and she's going to be down the floor, and there's going to be 3 seconds taken off the shot clock, and you're going to have 27 seconds to do whatever you would like to do with that potent offense. So I think that this is a style of basketball that only a few teams can really master, and Seton Hill, they are really mastering it right now.
And they might give up some easy hoops, but they're going to get their fair share of turnovers, and in particular, the live ball turnovers that directly lead to points the other way. So you give up maybe, let's say, 8 easy layups in a game because of that pressure, but all you have to do is make sure that you win that equation where you're creating more stops and turnovers and points the other way than easy ones, and you're surrendering. So that's where you mentioned, okay, they're scoring, let's say, 80 points per game. They're giving up 70. Well, the 80 leads the conference. The 70 might be second worst in the conference, but they're plus 10 points overall. So as long as you keep that margin, that means more than, maybe where your scoring defense ranks because of that style of play, to your point. So it's been successful, no doubt about that. They are perfect in the PSAC. They have just one loss. And again, they're near the top of the national rankings and regional rankings as well. That'll do it for our starting 5 takeaways. Let's now shift our focus to plays of the week, and we'll begin in Greater Latrobe with the girls team and the Wildcats. They lost to Penn Trafford at home on Tuesday, but Carly Burke had a terrific performance, topping 30 points and hitting the shot of the night to beat the buzzer in the first quarter, with myself and Greg Bizzicani detailing the action.
They throw it long. Doesn't look like they're going to. They do not. A little surprised at that. Burke with the heat. It goes! Carly Burke from beyond midcourt to beat the buzzer. And we'll see if that allows the Wildcats to get some momentum heading to the second quarter. What a shot by Burke.
What a performance by Burke. She's going to be headed to Millersville next year, put up 31 points in the loss, and certainly none more spectacular than that beyond midcourt heat to end the opening quarter. We'll continue plays of the week with Hempfield area boys, and the Spartans fell in a section matchup against Pittsburgh Central Catholic on Friday, but Dylan Firmstone produced a spectacular block as he nearly pinned Jaden Brown off the glass, with myself and Roger Downs providing the captioning.
Program history, joining the 2008 squad. Defensive breakdown, but a great recovery by Firmstone. And he is flexing after that block off of the glass.
Firmstone, as you said earlier, Sean, going to Penn State University on a baseball scholarship.
Well, Jack, have you ever smacked a shot off of the glass when someone was trying to finish the cup? Was that in
no,
your
not even close. No. That was not my forte. I was outside. I was beyond the perimeter kind of guy.
Maybe Dylan Firmstone can teach you how to get some offense. Watch the guys that we will wrap up plays of the week with the Seton Hill University women, and the Griffins ladies continued their stellar season with a home win against East Stroudsburg on Wednesday, with Christiane Fry leading the way. Her and one in the third quarter was another highlight in a season full of them for Seton Hill, with myself and Jack on the commentary.
Especially today, again, another good job by her disrupting that line of vision for Schmiel. And she's a player that knows her role.
Fry puts it in. Spectacular finish by Christiane Fry. And the Griffins really starting to pull away in this one.
Just a burst of speed, always knows the angles
Jack, we talked about Chris Dion Fry. You said maybe player of the year in the PSAC West. I think her teammate Mia Kalic also has an argument for that. But one thing about Fry, she's usually going to be the shortest or one of the shortest players on the floor. Rarely does that matter.
One of the best finishers, I would say, in Division II basketball. She is truly a master around the rim.
Yeah, incredible stuff from Fry. We've been kind of spoiled to see it over the last few years. We will now transition to our team of the week. It is the Greensburg Central Catholic boys team. They are now 8-0. And Jack, I'm going to be honest, it was really tough to pick a team this week. We have several boys and girls teams that are very deserving. Penn Trafford girls, Jeanette boys, they're also undefeated. You can only pick one team, though. GCC 8-0 overall, 3-0 in Class 2A Section 1. They're outscoring their opponents by nearly 30 per game. And what they did this past week in particular stands out. They blew out the Clairton Bears, which is usually a pretty good team, at Clairton. Then they put up 96 points against Cal in what was a nearly 60-point win. They capped it off by beating a 5A team in Kiski on Saturday. Just incredible effort.
On top of the 96 points, you've got 89 against Fraser. You got 81 against Greensburg Salem. You beat Franklin Regional, a team that went to the 5A States and WPIAL championship last year, beat them by 3. One thing about GCC that I'm sure they are really excited about is that Aliquippa is a thing of the past for them. They don't have to worry about the quips. They have moved up in classification, not around, not a problem. And I'm sure for GCC, they're sitting there thinking, okay, we don't have Tyree Turner and Franco Alvarez anymore, but we brought back everybody. And we mentioned it, I think, in the last episode too. You bring back Samir Crosby as well. So you bring in
AJ Tarpley from Greensburg Salem, who's been maybe many times their best player.
You honestly, it seems like they added even more than I think people thought they were going to, especially with the losses. I mean, we saw Tyree Turner and Franco Alvarez in the job they did. I'm really excited about the matchup they have against Jeanette because that's another team that I think has also matured and developed, and they're also off to a great start on their end. I think that could be a true test for them. I think if GCC flexes their muscle on Jeanette and beats them how they've been beating everybody else, I don't see anybody else in 2A competing with GCC because it just the way it's been the last few years, I feel like Aliquippa, Jeanette, and GCC would be those three. Aliquippa's gone, and if GCC can beat Jeanette, I think it's Jeanette's. I think it's GCC's championship actually this season to lose. They should be the favorites at this point.
Well, first off, how difficult is it to put up 96 points in a 32-minute high school game, especially knowing my guess is the entire second half was running clock because that activates when you're up 30 points in the second half. You would have to imagine that they were probably up 30 points at the half in that game. So really the second half is almost trimmed in half in terms of how much time you have to, you're probably looking at basically 25 minutes to score 96 points. It's truly remarkable.
Not to mention you have no shot clock. So you have nothing that's actually making you move at a quickened pace. They want to run the score up. I mean, if they had scored 100 points in a 32-minute basketball game with no shot clock, that would have been, I mean, even still, I mean, 80 plus points 3 times this year, and we're not even into January yet. I mean, that's a very incredible pace to play at, especially this early in the season. Question now is, can they keep it going, right? I mean, I think we've seen in the past teams that get off to a hot start in the first half, they cool off in the second half. Very rarely do you see a team that shot, 55% from 3, carry that into the second half, right? Can they carry this into the second half? Will they hit a wall? I think the big thing for them is they have to make sure everyone obviously stays healthy, but also they got to stick to what they've been doing because what they've been doing clearly is generating points, and defensively they're stifling teams to under 30 at times.
Well, keep in mind, this is a 2A team, and why I think it will continue is because they're finding ways, although not in blowout fashion, to beat 4A, 5A, and maybe even 6A teams. They defeated Franklin Regional by 3. They won convincingly against Greensburg Salem. They defeated Kiski area. They're going to be playing Hempfield, which is now a pretty solid 6A team. So they are doing everything they can to play much larger schools, trying to challenge them now, knowing that, to be honest, most section games outside of Jeanette probably will not be a challenge. So it's not like they're just sitting back and they're, cruising to these easy wins, and then all of a sudden they're going to get tested and they won't know how to handle it. They've proven they can handle it. And you talked about the additions with Samir Crosby coming back and Tarpley coming in. But I think the biggest difference is the internal growth from guys like Liam Gallagher, who has had an unbelievable week. I think he probably averaged about 25 points this past week, and he's just reigning in the 3-ball.
Yeah, and when you've got guys that have been around a system for a few years, they've waited their turn. Not only Gallagher, you got Brady O'Rourke that's been around the block a little bit too. They have been in the kind of waiting in the side, waiting for Tyree Turner to graduate, waiting for Franco Alvarez. And now they have been able to blossom into their own players. And I'm sure that's where this confidence is also starting to come out for everybody. And it's contagious, right? And I think that also they probably felt a little extra boost knowing, hey, we've got our old teammate Samir coming back. That's going to add a totally different element to us because, what Christian Highland has said about Samir Crosby, I think is right on the nose. Everything I've watched him play as well. Every 50-50 ball, it seems that it is Samir Crosby's. And when you've got a player that, is it maybe looking to score 20 points a game or 15 points a game, but he's looking to win the possession battle, do everything else for you, makes everybody else's role a lot easier. Liam Gallagher can focus on what he wants to focus on, and everybody else can have their roles as it is. And I think that, again, Samir Crosby, he's what is keeping this whole thing glued together.
Yeah, and of course, we mentioned they play Hempfield at Greensburg Salem in a holiday tournament. They also play Ligonier Valley in that same tournament. Their next section game will be at Bentworth. That's one that you figure, again, they could win pretty convincingly. So congrats to Greensburg Central Catholic, their players, and of course, our good pal Christian Highland, their coach. They are our team of the week. Well, let's wrap up this holiday edition of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast with a look ahead. And Jack, there's no section games this upcoming week, obviously. It's going to be holiday tournaments. So let's look at what's ahead for boys and girls and then mix in a little bit of college action as well. Some notable games on the boys' side. Thursday, which is the day after Christmas, the 26th, Southmoreland at East Allegheny. And then Friday and Saturday, we have those tournament-style events. York against Ligonier Valley, Mount Pleasant at Greensburg Salem. Of course, Greensburg Salem is hosting these 2-day tournaments. GCC against Hempfield, we just mentioned, Connellsville versus Jeanette, and Bell Vernon area at Deer Lakes outside of tournament play. The next day, Mount Pleasant against Connellsville, Ligonier Valley against GCC, Jeanette versus York, Hempfield at Greensburg Salem, and then Bell Vernon area against Keystone Oaks. So those should be some good matchups on the boys' side. Girls' side, Friday, River Valley at Burrell, Laurel Highlands at Greater Latrobe, Connellsville versus Jeanette, Bell Vernon area at Deer Lakes. I'm looking at the wrong thing. All right, let me try that one again. River Valley at Burrell, Laurel Highlands at Greater Latrobe, Indiana versus Hempfield, West Mifflin at Mount Pleasant, Greensburg Salem versus Connellsville. Mount Pleasant is going to be one of the host sites. Hempfield at Greater Latrobe and Greensburg Salem at Mount Pleasant are on Saturday. Sunday basketball, Bell Vernon against GCC, and then Monday, the Centurions against Our Lady of the Sacred Heart. Franklin Regional against Upper St. Clair. We also have some college action. Sunday, Adrian at Pitt Greensburg on the men's side, St. Vincent versus SUNY Canton on the women's side in Las Vegas, which sounds a pretty nice way to spend the holiday. St. Vincent versus Redlands out in Las Vegas on the women's side on Monday. Adrian at St. Vincent and Pitt Greensburg at Teal in women's basketball. And then Tuesday, Pitt Greensburg men at Baldwin Wallace. Anything jump out? I'm sure you've played in a fair share of holiday tournaments in your day.
Holiday tournaments are great. It's a way for you to play teams that you don't normally play. My high school always had one. We had teams from out of town come and play, so that was cool. We had teams from, Florida, California, and they would come play. But I'm really curious about this GCC Hempfield matchup. I know we talked about GCC, but Hempfield is a significantly improved team from last year. They are significantly improved from a year ago. And then Bell Vernon and Deer Lakes. I know that we've heard a little bit about, they've had some, Bell Vernon's had some guys in and out of the lineup. Can they finally kind of all get on the same page? And against a good Deer Lakes team that we highlighted earlier as well. But over for the girls, I think Bell Vernon and GCC, that should also be a really good one. Curious to see how GCC does against Ulsh on Monday as well. And then Franklin Regional and Upper St. Clair. That's a really big game for Franklin Regional, a big test for them. If they can come out and beat Upper St. Clair, I don't see why anybody would say that Franklin Regional wouldn't be the favorite for the section at that point.
I would even say if they can hang with Upper St. Clair, because that's a team that many people think could be the one that maybe knocks off Norwin in 6A. So we'll see. That's a really good Panthers team. So there's a lot to look forward to. Non-section, as we mentioned, both boys and girls, but still meaningful basketball at this time of year. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast. First off, happy holidays, Merry Christmas. Everyone hopefully will enjoy that. And while they have some downtime, maybe over the break, they'll take in this episode and all the great content that we have on the Westmoreland Sports Network website each and every day. Jack, we're going to take next week off. We'll be back the weekend after section play resumes. It'll be 2025 by then. Crazy to hear that, but looking forward to that. So hopefully you go enjoy your holiday break. I'll enjoy mine. We'll reconvene once we get back into the thick of things in the year 2025. But for now, we will sign off. Thanks so much for tuning in. You know, you can check us out just about each and every week right here on our YouTube channel. It's the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.